these items will never be in Lumber Tycoon 2. And here's why. Throughout my time of playing Lumber Tycoon 2, I've made and submitted hundreds of items to Defaultio, some of which you can actually find in-game right now. However, for each item that makes it into the game, tens of others do not, and in this video, I'll be explaining 6 items that I made that did not end up getting into Lumber Tycoon 2. And I'm going to be explaining what these items were, how I intended for them to be added, and also why they were ultimately rejected from the game. So without further ado, let's hop right into the first item. Alright, so to start off the list, I have the I-beam. Now the I-beam is actually a placeable structure that would be unwrapped from the Gift of Support, which I priced at around $300 and would have intended to be in fancy furnishings. Now the I-beam itself has a pretty simple look, but what it could do for building would be absolutely insane. And that's because it would actually give builders a way to work with the metal material without having to do a hacky solution such as using the backside of a wood sweeper. And I can just imagine so many builds where the I-beam could be useful if used right, as it's just such a simple item to add just on its own, or to use as the texture for the side that doesn't have any corrugation. Now, unfortunately, for these reasons, it does make it quite a difficult item to add into the game, and the reason why it was ultimately rejected by Defaultio is that it would simply be too OP as a decorative item. And I honestly don't blame him, as the I-beam would be a complete game changer for building, and I can imagine it would be very, very annoying for casual players to get their hands on a ton of I-beams, as they'd have to go trading. And with the state of Lumber Tycoon 2's economy today, having to trade for hundreds if not thousands of these I-beams would be a very daunting and really annoying task, so it makes sense why this item wasn't added. And it's kind of unfortunate because I really do like how the gift turned out and the item itself, and I would love to see this in-game one day, but in order for that to happen, there would probably have to be another way to obtain the metal material first. Now next up we have one-way glass, and one-way glass was intended to be sold at fancy furnishings next to the normal glass panes, and cost around double or triple the price. And now the gimmick with this one-way glass is that you can see through it on one side, but not the other, allowing you to build some potentially interesting things like interrogation rooms, or simply put them on the outside of your base if you don't want people seeing your stuff. And while I think this is a very cool idea and something that deserves to be in the game, the reason why it was ultimately rejected, at least in my opinion, is because of how janky it is. And that's because Roblox doesn't actually allow you to make one-way glass in the typical sense, so what I actually did to achieve this effect is put a decal over one side of the glass. And because of how decals and the glass material works on Roblox, if you look through a piece of glass, all decals just do not render. And that makes it so that when you look through the back side of the glass, you actually can see straight through it, but of course if you look through the front, you will see the decal. And unfortunately, this means that you can bypass the effect entirely if you just look through another piece of glass, or even hold up an axe that has glass in it, like the Amber axe. So yeah, while I think that one-way glass is a very cool idea, and I would love to see it in-game, it ultimately just doesn't work because of Roblox not giving us a way to actually make one-way glass fully feasible. Alright guys, moving on, we have the Mentoes candy, and honestly, I thought this candy bar would never see the light of day, but after I decided I would be making this video, I had to include it. Basically, this piece of candy was one that was originally intended to be added in the golden bag of candy, which was released a few years ago, and it's pretty obvious why it didn't make the cut. It's just kinda weird, I guess. I don't know, I was pretty bored when I made this candy bar. I just thought it might be kind of funny, like, Mentoes. It's not even a Lumber Tycoon 2 pun. It makes no sense. But then I decided that, you know, Defaultio has, like, French fries for legs as his avatar, so, like, maybe that's, like, kind of funny, like, French fries? French fries? Yeah, honestly, I have no idea why I made this, but it's pretty obvious why it didn't make it into the actual candy bag. If this video gets 1,000 likes, I'll add it to the next candy bag I make, though. So smash that like button if you want Mentos. Moving along, we have the ambulance, or for short, the Ambu. And the reason why I made this item in the first place is because Defaultio was converting a real ambulance into sort of a movable living home space, and I thought it was a very cool project and decided to try to recreate it in the style of Lumber Tycoon 2. And deep down, I knew this item would really never make it into the game, but I submitted it to Defaultio anyways just to see what he thought about it, and he did actually really like it. And just for some background here, the ambulance would be this nice little vehicle that you could drive around Lumber Tycoon 2. It would cost a lot of money and be sold in boxed cars during the winter event a few years ago. And being a Christmas gift, it wouldn't really have that many use cases. It would just be kind of fun to drive around. You could turn the lights on, you could honk the horn maybe. I'm not really sure. It would just be a fun vehicle overall. And the gift that this item would be unboxed from is the gift of harmonic safety, and it would cost over 200,000 money, which at the time would have made it the most expensive gift. Now ultimately, the reason why Defaultio decided not to add this vehicle to the game is simply because it's a little too complex. I mean, just compare the ambulance to some other vehicles in the game like the utility vehicle and the Vols, it's just way too complicated. And also mind you that this was before the snowmobile or ATV, so it would have been the first ever vehicle not made by Defaultio, and I think it would have just been a little too jarring. Additionally, it does have quite a few parts which would potentially make it a bit laggy. However, the biggest reason why I believe Defaultio did not actually add this to the game is that it just doesn't really make sense as a Christmas vehicle. So while it was a lot of fun to build, it totally makes sense to me why we will never see this item in the game. Next up, we have a unique one, that being the Christmas Crate Blueprint. Now the Christmas Crate Blueprint would be unboxed from the gift of Spirited Architecture, which would ideally be sold in War R Us for around 6,000 money. And what makes this gift so interesting is that it would actually be a blueprint that you could add to your blueprint inventory, place down on your base, and fill with any wood you wanted. And just to add a little more flair, this blueprint also displays the username of whoever's base it's placed on, much like the sold sign. Now ultimately, the reason why this one didn't make it into the game is because Defaultio was just not ready for there to be a limited time blueprint. And that totally makes sense, as having a limited time blueprint means that you have to trade with other players in order to max out your blueprint collection, which would be a little tedious. However, I knew this might happen when designing this gift, and that's why I made the Christmas crate as simple as possible to still justify it being its own blueprint, but also make sure that it could be replicated pretty well with just some normal blueprints like tiny tiles. That way, it makes sense for it to be its own blueprint, but also is just completely optional and not necessary if you don't want it. But unfortunately, I think I made the blueprint just a little too useful and too detailed to actually justify recreating it with other blueprints, which means that if you wanted the crate blueprint, you would need to trade for it. And that's probably the reason why Defaultio chose not to add it. However, I'm not sure exactly if the door for limited edition blueprints is fully closed or not, and maybe one day in the future we will see an actual limited edition blueprint make it into the game. Now the final item I have in today's video is the Cauldron. And the Cauldron would have been an item sold at Fancy Furnishings for around 1,000 money that would return every single year like the blue steel axe, except this time for Halloween. Now when you first place the Cauldron on your base, nothing would happen, it would just be an empty cauldron that you could use for decoration. However, where the Cauldron gets interesting is that if you place a certain item into it, for example an eyeball, it would actually start brewing. And you would know that the Cauldron is brewing once it fills up with liquid and has all of these swirling effects. And depending on which item you actually threw into the Cauldron, you would brew up a different spell. So for example, if you were to throw the eyeball into the Cauldron, you would brew up the night vision spell, and when hovering your mouse over the liquid and pressing E, you would actually drink the spell, which would empty the Cauldron, and then gain the night vision effect, which would just give you basically no fog. And the possibilities for this item are basically endless, as there are so many loose items that really have almost no purpose, such as the pink candy bar or the cyan candy bar, that could produce some pretty cool spells if you threw them into the Cauldron. Anyways, it's really obvious to see why the Cauldron never made it into the game. It's just a crazy idea. I mean, We have some pretty crazy stuff in Lumber Tycoon 2, but having potions, I don't know, it just feels a little too far. And I'm sure that the amount of effort required to actually make this fully functional would just be way too much, when instead Defaultio could just add the usual stuff like another bag of candy and another pumpkin. So while the idea of getting all of these potions and making all of these extra use cases for items sounds really cool, it just doesn't really fit in Lumber Tycoon 2, and I'm sure it would be just a little too much effort for the payoff. Alrighty guys, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed all 6 of these items, which will never be in Lumber Tycoon 2. Also, tell me if you want more videos like this, because as I said at the start, I have a ton of items that never made it into the game, and I'd be very happy to go over them in a future video. But for now, this is going to be it for me. So, goodbye.